Welcome everyone. My name is Sherry Barnabas and I'm the moderator for today's call. I'd like to thank everyone for taking the time out of your busy day to participate in today's presentation entitled Got RPG and .NET, Stop Mixing and Start Fusing. On today's call we have Mr. David Brault. David is LANSA's product manager and has over 15 years of experience in the System I industry, including integrating IBM I supply chain applications with various Windows, web, and wireless technologies. At this time, I'd like to turn the call over to Mr. David Brault. Mr. Brault, you may begin.
Thanks so much, Sherry. Again, my name is David Brault. I'm product manager at LANSA. On today's call, we're going to be focusing on how iFusion.net can help organizations that need native real-time integration between their IBM I and their .NET applications. Today's session will last for roughly 30 to 40 minutes today before we open it up for questions and answers. Actually, I have a favor to ask of everybody on today's call. If you could, over the next couple minutes, please send Sherry a chat message just identifying what brought you here today. Now, I'm not looking for a novel, just something brief like a sentence or two that will just help me focus in on what topics I should cover that are actually of interest for today's group. Hopefully everybody that's using voice over IP can hear me clearly today. I will have Sherry send out a broadcast message in just a moment that contains a dial-in number and a passcode just in case anybody needs it later on during the presentation. Some quick housekeeping tasks before we begin today. The webcast technology that we're using is called GoToWebinar. So if this were your desktop, then this is where you'd be watching the presentation, which is probably pretty obvious by now. This is the attendee control panel, which gives you access to various webinar functions. Now, if you don't see this panel on your screen, sometimes it does auto-hide after about 30 seconds. Now, to restore this panel, just look up here in the upper right-hand corner and click on the button with the two arrows on it. This will restore the attendee control panel. Here is where you can ask us questions. Sherry will take care of answering all your questions during today's presentation, unless, of course, they are product related. I'll take care of the product questions at the end of the webinar, but please feel free to submit your questions at any moment in time. I'd rather have you get them in early than forget about them at the end of the presentation. This little fella here is called the Grab tab. The top icon is used to hide and display the attendee control panel, as we just saw before. The middle icon is used to toggle in and out of full screen viewing mode. And finally, the bottom icon is just a way to raise your hand if you need to get our attention. And lastly, all attendees that participate through the entire presentation and fill out the survey at the end will receive a free LANSA t-shirt and a free copy of Mike Odie's white paper on integrating IBM and Microsoft technologies. All right, enough with the housekeeping and on with the show. I find it actually quite funny that a lot of people equate having a mixture of RPG and .NET technologies to working with oil and water. If you think about it, like, no matter how hard you try to mix them together, you just never seem to have a fully blended solution. And honestly, if you're only working with the freebie ODBC drivers and the freebie toolkits from IBM, then it probably is a lot like working with oil and water. But you know what? It doesn't have to be that way. In fact, fusing Microsoft and IBM technologies together, when done right, can actually be a recipe for success. It's a lot like the concept of yin and yang, where LANSA believes that with iFusion.net, we can take these seemingly opposite technologies and actually let them be quite complementary in a greater whole. So let's take a quick poll to see what today's audience looks like. We're going to try and figure out if everybody's a bunch of yins, yangs, or a little bit of both. So answer the following. Which group best describes you? Do you develop or manage RPG projects and maybe have some potential .NET requirements coming on down the horizon? Do you develop or manage .NET projects and maybe have the need to integrate with IBM I sometime in the future? Or do you develop or manage both environments and you're just looking for maybe a little bit easier way to get things done? So we'll wait till we get a majority of the people voting, then we'll take a look at the results real time here. We got about 68% voted. We'll wait a few more seconds to get that to be in the 80s or 90s, and then we'll take a look here. So we're getting closer, 78%. I guess we'll shut her down. Okay, let's take a look. So it looks like, excuse me, Majority of us are RPG folks, and then second place is you're developing both RPG and .NET, and then we have a handful at about 11% of the people that are strictly .NET people. So not too surprising, seeing especially how Microsoft has become a mainstay in our business world. Inevitably, we need to better integrate these two technologies. The next thing I'm going to try to do is break down this whole interoperability stuff into simple terms by psychoanalyzing how I see our world today. Now, don't worry, I'm not going to go Dr. Freud on you and start asking you about your relationship with your mother or anything, but we do want to try and interpret what today's developer is, what they're going through. Now, that said, you are going to see Dr. Freud pop up every time I reveal one of my personal interpretations. So anyway, here we go. My analysis is that, our company, we're running IBM hardware, and we've probably been doing so for a long time now, probably back to the days when it was called the AS400. And now more than ever, our company is heavily vested in this platform, really, if you think about it, because of all the applications that we've built and possibly purchased over the last decade or two. And as a result of that, our developers now have to maintain a gazillion lines of source code. I realize that a gazillion is probably not a real number, but if it were a real number, it'd be a lot. And that's how many lines of code we'd have to maintain. Now, buried inside this gazillion lines of RPG code is the DNA of our business. It's all the validation rules, all the business logic, all the procedures that make our applications unique. It's all that business information that we've maintained, over the years to satisfy our changing business requirements. It's all this intellectual property that we've amassed over the years, and what's important about it, it's a very valuable asset to our company. But over the last, say, 10 to 15 years, we've slowly watched Microsoft technologies become a mainstay in our business world. It probably started off with a couple end-user applications like Excel or Word, but now many of us actually have packages written in .NET running inside our organization, and as we saw in the poll today, some of us even have their development tools in-house for application development as well. Now, deep down inside, I think we shudder at the thought of allowing .NET applications with direct, unprotected access to our production data. And because of this, we've opted to have a lot of our .NET applications actually just talk to SQL servers instead. But now we're living in a world of, synchronization updates, nightly batches, and data conflicts, longing for the much simpler days of just when everything ran off of one server. Well, it doesn't pay to lose any sleep over this stuff, folks, so let's get off the couch, let's put down the Xanax, and discover how iFusion.net can solve a lot of these problems. So like we saw in our previous poll, we have, 3 different types of people on today's call. Whether you're a developer or a manager, you fall into one of these 3 different buckets. The first group either manages or develops RPG projects, and they're probably curious about .NET integration. They may even have some sort of, new .NET requirements coming down the pipe. Now, when I say RPG, I really mean we're IBM I developers or managers. This means we not only develop in RPG, but we also work with data areas. We have CL programs we work with, DB2 files, data queues, etc., etc. And we might even do a little bit of COBOL work just for fun. Now, the second group manages or develops .NET projects, and they probably have a new requirement to integrate with this thing they've never heard of before called the IBM I, that box where all those green screen programs live. And just like with RPG, when I say .NET developers, I'm really talking about things like WPF or Windows Presentation Foundation, Silverlight, class libraries, SQL databases, and probably a couple different .NET development languages as well. And last but not least, we have that lucky group who's in the middle, and they either develop in or they manage a mixed mode development environment, and they have to deal with both these technologies on a daily basis. Now, by and large, I try my best not to speak on behalf of other people because it tends to get me in trouble, but here we go anyway. Each of these groups, and there's Dr. Freud, has their own concerns and their own fears. Now, for the group on the left that deals with RPG projects, here are some of your biggest fears. You're worried about giving .NET applications direct access to DB2 via ODBC because it does lack some security. You're also worried about .NET programs putting bad data into production because these applications could potentially bypass all of your RPG validation rules and business logic. Then you're probably thinking to yourself, I have a gazillion lines of RPG business logic. How in the heck is the .NET team ever going to be able to replicate that? Now, you're also afraid of just plain old losing control, right? These are your applications, your children that you've nurtured over the past decade or so, and now you have external sources that you cannot control performing transactions against the systems that you've put in place over the last 10 to 15 years. Now, as for the .NET folks, they obviously have some issues too. For starters, if you're using ODBC and you do a lot of heavy transactions against the IBMI, you've probably noticed some performance issues with your .NET apps when they have to transact with large volumes of data against the IBMI. And again, since you know very little about this platform, about IBMI and its native objects like data queues and data areas and OS 400 commands, etc., you're probably scratching your head right now wondering, well, how am I going to access these objects and take advantage of some of these features? And last, because again, you know, you're not familiar with this platform, it's very foreign to you, you're probably worried that you're going to have to become an expert on this hardware platform in order to incorporate some of its native features inside of your .NET applications. Now, the RPG and the .NET groups, they probably think the folks in the middle, they have it made because they're already working with both these technologies. But, you know, the group in the middle, they've already tried to integrate these two worlds, and they've realized that using ODBC and the IBMI toolkit, it's just not enough, and they're looking for an easier way. So not only does the group in the middle have all the same fears and all the same obstacles as the other two groups, but they're also worried about things like dual maintenance and duplicating business logic that already exists in their RPG applications, and then deal with the stress of hoping that every validation check within the two different environments is identical and they didn't miss something along the way. A lot of folks in the middle have introduced new SQL databases into the mix because they don't want to risk .NET applications directly updating DB2 data. Now they have to try and automate, you know, the synchronization and the data conflicts as much as they can, and it's just not as straightforward as it sounds. And also, especially for the people who have to manage inside this middle group, it's just difficult to allocate resources to new assignments because if you think about it, the skill sets differ so much between these two different development camps. Which brings us to iFusion.net. iFusion.net is an IBM and Microsoft interoperability solution. And if you're asking yourself, what in the heck does that mean? Well, it means that iFusion.net is a solution that breaks down all the barriers and bridges the gap between IBMI and Microsoft technologies. Today, most companies doing any kind of .NET development against their IBMI are probably using, you know, ODBC drivers to access the IBMI data to get it into and out of their .NET applications. But as applications become more distributed and especially more transactional, it becomes imperative that a proper data services layer be introduced into the system architecture at some point in time. And don't worry, we will define what a data services layer means in just a few minutes. Now, iFusion.net, it actually addresses a very wide range of integration issues, but for today's session, we're just going to focus on two. The first being protecting the accuracy of your data by implementing a data services layer, and second, supplying your .NET developers with native access to IBMI features and functions. So let's start off with the data services layer. There's that old adage, you know, can one person change the world? Well, obviously that's debatable, but with iFusion.net, one person can change their development world. What I want you to do is think about what happens today in your company. When you need to make a business rule change that impacts, say, 10, 15, maybe 20 of your RPG programs. Any change, regardless how trivial it may appear on the surface, it's going to produce a ripple effect across your entire organization. Now factor in that you may have to modify a bunch of .NET programs too, obviously so that all your interfaces, 5250, Windows and web, they all have the same validation rules. Now suddenly, your workload increases substantially. Now, we must be cautious when we change system-wide business rules, because forgetting to update just one program effectively means that your applications are now not only going to be inconsistent, but they're out of compliance. And now the integrity of your data will be in jeopardy. Now, speaking of jeopardy, let's take another quick poll, and we will do it in the style of Jeopardy, where the question is the answer and the answer is the question. So the answer is the percentage of programs that have duplicate validation rules and business logic. The answers are, what is 0%, what is 25%, what is 50%, what is 75%, what is 90%. Again, the answer is the percentage of programs that have duplicate validation rules and business logic inside my organization. And as soon as we hear, take a look at the results. All right, so well, let's wait a little bit longer. We got 54% voting. Let's take a little bit more time here to get that a little bit higher. Okay, we're at 66, 69. That this is a smidge higher. All right, we're in the 70s. We'll take a look. So here's what our audience looks like today. So of everybody on today's call, the highest one here is at 42%, which says about 25% of your programs have duplicate code. In second place is, wow, 75%. Then we got a three-way tie for basically everybody in the middle at the end. So some of us are lucky enough to have zero duplicated code. Some of us are at 50%, and unfortunately there's a portion of us at 90%. So now for the folks in the higher ranges, I'm sure the scenario that we're about to cover is really going to hit home with you, and I think you're going to like what we're about to discuss. So remember when we said that iFusion.net's yin and yang approach enables these opposing forces to complement each other in a greater whole? Well, let's peel back the layers and see how iFusion.net and a data services layer makes this possible. So what you see before you now, this is a cross-section of our development world, at least what it looks like when we're using a data services layer. So at the center of the world, the orange section is where we find the data services layer. This is where all of our core business logic, no pun intended there, and validation rules, this is where they live. It's the foundation for which everything is built upon. Now the yellow section, this is our application logic. It's the code that dictates the flow of our applications. Now, this is things like when we need to cater for, like when the application needs to do database I/O. What's going to happen? It's going to pass off that request to the orange section, and then it just lets the data services layer take it from there. The gray part of our screen, this is our screen logic. This is the code that essentially controls the aesthetics of our application's screens. Now the problem is that most companies don't have an orange section. They don't have a data services layer. All they have is that yellow layer, which means all their business logic and their validation rules is intertwined with their application logic. So to make a business rule change, you have to search through everything inside that yellow layer and then find all that logic that needs to be updated, make those changes, recompile all those programs that were modified, and then cross your fingers that you didn't miss anything. Now, alternatively, anything you change here in the orange section is made available to all other layers without having to recompile the world. Whether the applications are 5250, Windows, or web, or maybe all three, they all share the same rules, and now none of that validation code resides inside that yellow layer anymore, which makes code smaller and easier to read. Now you're going to notice how much more important the data services layer becomes as we start adding more and more .NET applications into the mix. The more orange we have, the less yellow we need, which makes application development and, more importantly, maintenance a lot more productive. Now the heart and soul of the data services layer is the meta repository, which centralizes all of the information about our business. So for example, all of our DB2 files and SQL table definitions are stored here, as well as all the field and column information. Things like, its physical makeup, labels, column headings, these types of identifiers that can be used on our screens and inside of things like grids. It also supports all the multilingual attributes as well, even double byte character set, so that you can now share this all this field and column information between your 5250 and .NET applications. You can even store field level help text at this point in time too that can be used inside of all your applications. We can start putting validation rules into this repository, from simple rules like, you know, a field must be in this list of static values, to a value must exist inside of a file or a table, to more complex business logic where you can actually call APIs or write source code that will validate a particular business rule. All of the error messages for these validation rules are stored here too, and that's actually what gets sent back to the applications for your end users. It's nice English-like messages that make sense to the end user. You can also create these things called virtual fields and then attach them to your files or tables. Now, they're called virtual fields in the sense that they're available inside the iFusion.net environment, but if you were to look at these fields and these tables inside your database management system, you wouldn't see those columns or those fields attached to the files or tables. Virtual fields are great for doing things like, you know, calculations of sums and totals, etc., substringing routines that you would normally do inside your source code, inside that yellow layer. You can also do triggers here as well. Now, there's really nothing more to add in terms of triggers other than they are platform agnostic, meaning if you decide to port a file from one database management system to another, the triggers automatically move along with the file with no sort of maintenance or anything, just automatically made available in the new DBMS. And last but not least, there's also security. So you can now secure the access of IBMI objects based on user profile and object level security. So managers now don't have to worry about .NET developers giving end users access to files or tables that they don't have authority to work with. So how does this all work? Well, here is our IBMI. And all your core business logic and validation rules are now stored and executed on the IBMI server, obviously the same place where your data lives, which is good. You now have one spot, also known as a single point of truth, or called a spot, single point of truth, to review and update all the business logic and validation rules for all your enterprise applications. Now, the graphical interface into the repository, it's very intuitive, where developers or maybe even business analysts can easily create or update business rules. Most of the time, rules are created using, you know, point and click or fill in the blank type operations, but obviously for more complicated rules, developers can write source code or even call existing APIs. Now, iFusion.net takes care of generating the data services layer for us. And what it's doing, it's exposing all that core validation rules and business logic to the .NET developers through an easy-to-use class library. Now, for the RPG folks on today's call, just think of as a class library as a set of ready-made software routines. Now, anytime your .NET applications uses the data services layer to access IBMI data, iFusion.net enforces the validation rules on every attempted insert, update, or delete. Now, for the RPG programmers and the managers on today's call, what this means is you can give full read-write access to your .NET programs and still be sure that there will be no way that they can write bad data into the database. So, for example, if your company has written or maybe even purchased any kind of .NET rich client applications, they can now be modified to be more transactional than before by implementing this data services layer, implementing all of its validation and security. The same holds true for any ASP.NET web page, whether they're hosted or even developed in-house. Any .NET browser application could take advantage of the data services layer as well. Better yet, your legacy green screen programs can also interact with all these rules in the repository too, which means we can now create and maintain all of our enterprise business rules in one spot and then enforce them everywhere. Rich client applications, browser applications, and even our legacy 5250 green screen programs. Now, that last sentence was very important, so I want to repeat it. As a developer, once you've added rules to the repository, and you try to now, say, update a record in the database, every single program, 5250, Windows and web, will adhere to the rules in the repository. So let's compare life before and after iFusion.net's data services layer. So as we mentioned before, you have a gazillion lines of RPG code running your enterprise systems, a lot of which is, determines the validity of data before letting any of that information be written to the database. And chances are, a lot of that validation logic has been replicated inside your .NET applications as well. And as I mentioned before, for whatever reason, .NET applications tend to run in silos against SQL databases, which means we now have to sync up the data, resolve all the data conflicts between these different databases. And by the way, if you haven't figured it out by now, this is a very costly way to develop and maintain any sort of enterprise solutions. Now with iFusion.net, all the database I/O goes through the data services layer, giving us complete confidence that every read, every write, every delete is going to be validated. And for all of you longtime IBM developers and managers who are longing for the days of having that single enterprise database again, well, here you go. Here's a way to get there. Now, another feature that separates iFusion.net from just, data access drivers, like ODBC, is that it provides a lot more capability than just reading, updating, and deleting information in a database. For example, you can also execute OS 400 commands directly from your .NET application. So if you need to be able to perform, some of the same OS level operations that your RPG programs execute as part of a process, you now have the ability to do so. You can also work with and manage spool files directly now from your .NET applications. iFusion.net enables you to access data areas, right? These are the same data areas that your 5250 applications access. So it's important for us to remember, and this is very, very important, that business information is not always stored inside of a database file or table. So it's vital that your .NET applications have access to the same information that your RPG programs use that ODBC cannot reach. Everything is not always stored in a database file. You can also work directly now with the IFS with iFusion.net, which is obviously important because being able to access unstructured data stored on the integrated file system is important when you want to merge structured data with unstructured data inside of one application. Data queues are another popular IBM I feature that a lot of RPG developers use today. Now with iFusion.net, your .NET applications can now interact with the same data queues just as easily as your RPG developers and programs can do today. You can also send email directly from the IBM I, right, directly from your .NET applications. There may be a situation out there where email has to be sent from the IBM I instead of your Exchange server. For those situations, iFusion.net's got you covered. Now, another cool feature, at least I think it's cool, maybe I should have had Dr. Freud pop up right there, but another cool feature is that data sent back to your .NET application can actually retain the same formatting that you have on your IBM I. When I say formatting, I'm talking about any kind of edit codes or edit words you've applied to your fields or to your data elements. Now, while this may seem to be like a pretty trivial feature because honestly, it's very easy to format data with just a line or two of .NET code. But imagine this scenario. Imagine that your DBA changes the edit code or changes an edit word of a field back on the server. And you use that field in 25 .NET applications. Well, you're in store for a lot of maintenance if you're reformatting that data inside your .NET code. The alternative would be to have no maintenance using iFusion.net. Plus, you don't run the risk of accidentally forgetting to update one of those 25 different .NET programs. And last but not least is calling APIs. Many packaged systems that are available for the IBM I have APIs that can be called that perform a variety of different certain functions. And probably you could say even with the recent SOA push, a lot of companies have just been manually going through their code and tried to modularize some of their source code into external callable routines with well-defined input and output parameters. So these APIs can be called in real time from your .NET applications. You're not submitting them to batch. You're calling them synchronously, real time from your .NET application. So What's nice about this is you don't have to go and create a web service, to make this available in .NET. Just any plain old RPG, COBOL APIs will do. Now, since we're talking about APIs, let's take I believe it's our final poll of the day, just to see if our audience is starting to modularize their source code. So just answer this: have you begun modularizing your source code into callable APIs? Just answer yes, no, but we are in the process of modularizing, no, but we're planning on it, or just plain old no. So everybody's just answer that question quickly. Once we get the percentage of those voting up in the 80s, we'll take a look at the results. We're at 73% right now. Excuse me. All right, okay, we're in the 80s. Let's take a look. So in first place, okay, that's great. A lot of you guys have already gone through and modularized your code. That is very, very important if you want to be able to have that core legacy business logic be reused from other platforms, not only .NET, but Java or whatever. Let's see what we got in second place is no. Well, just the opposite of what I said to the guys for yes applies to the people for no. What you really want to do, if you don't want to be duplicating code, the easiest way to do this is to try and strip that out into a callable routine and then have it be called from all your RPG programs. Don't duplicate that code. And now once it's set up, iFusion.net easily allows you to call that same API from any .NET Windows application or web application. So everybody can be reusing those code. And then everybody else who said no, at least you're either in the process or you're planning on it. So that's a good strategy moving forward in terms of opening up your RPG logic to other platforms. Okay, we'll close that out and we'll continue. Now for the .NET developers on today's call, if you're wondering how this native access works, let's just dig one level deeper and take a look. And this will be the most technical we get in terms of RPG today. I'm sorry, in terms of .NET today. So what happens is developers, .NET developers, they code away in their favorite .NET language. Doesn't matter if it's C#, VB.NET, or whatever, right? So what they just do is they use the iFusion.NET class library whenever they need to access something on the IBM I. So just so you're aware, we're using this class library. There's full IntelliSense available, as well as tooltips for methods, and there's code snippets available, which for the RPG developers on today's call, all that jargon that I just mentioned means is that it's easy for them to work with, and there's coding wizards available to help generate some of the code a little bit quicker. Now, all the methods of the class library are available for the developers, so they can now interact with all the native IBM I features that we just talked about. And again, without any knowledge of the IBM I. So for example, let's say one of your RPG developers tells the .NET developer that they need to put the letter Y in position 34 of a specific data area at the end of a business process. Now, the .NET developer, they don't need to know what a data area is or how it's implemented back in the server. All they need to know is there's a command that allows me to do it and what the parameters are, and they're done. It makes it a lot easier for them. iFusion.net takes care of securely routing all the requests back to the server, and it's just going to use some industry standard encryption protocols and actually compresses the data as well before it moves it across the pipe. And once the request hits the server, the appropriate actions are taken. So if the request is to say update a record, it's going to verify the data integrity before updating that record, and then automatically send back the appropriate errors if to the .NET program if it fails to pass the validation checks. It's that simple. So data will never get inserted, updated, or deleted into the IBM I DB2 database from a .NET application unless it passes all the validation checks. It has to pass everything before that I/O will take place. So as you can see, it's pretty straightforward for a .NET developer to pick this up because really all the magic is happening back on the server. It's all behind the scenes. So for them, they just work with the class library, which they're very used to doing on a daily basis. And again, they don't have to become an IBM I expert either and able to use these features. So what kind of benefits can iFusion.net bring to a mixed mode development group? Well, you start by sharing resources. And I can't I can't underscore enough how important this is. When companies can centralize legacy knowledge into a repository, it means it helps eliminate developers from reinventing the wheel over and over again by duplicating business rules and validation logic, data calculations, batch routines in both their .NET and RPG source code. So what happens is all legacy knowledge goes into a central repository that everybody can use. It's not tucked away, in the back of somebody's mind. It's not written on a Post-it note that's stuck to somebody's monitor. It's not information that was scribbled on a napkin during last year's Christmas party. It's all available for everybody to use. And don't forget, the data services layer can be used in a pure RPG. I don't even know if I mentioned this, but it can be used in a pure RPG or COBOL shop as well. Even if you don't use .NET, but you're just duplicating source code between all your RPG or COBOL programs, you can use this in that environment too. You don't even have to have .NET. So it really helps reduce the amount of duplicated code. It also allows for more real-time integration. You can finally break down those walls between your applications by enabling .NET programs to access the same objects that 5250 applications have been using for many years now, and do so in real time. So finally, .NET developers have an easy way to access data areas, data queues, call APIs interactively, or synchronously, issue OS/400 commands real time, work with spool files, and really the list goes on and on. You can also preserve your data accuracy and the integrity of your database. So say goodbye to inaccurate data by enforcing the same validation rules and the same business rules everywhere for every application that touches DB2 data. So stop putting that code, in your applications and start creating data services layer that can police the information that goes into and out of your enterprise database. You're going to have better security and performance. If you think about 5250 applications, they really enjoy the speed and the scalability of native record-level access to all the information stored inside of DB2, right? That's built into the operating system. It's very, very fast. Now you can bring this same speed and this same security that RPG programs have enjoyed for the last decade, or a couple decades, to your .NET programs as well. So the way this works is all, back on the IBM I, we're using RPG to access the data. We're not using SQL. We're using the native features that make this platform as productive as it is. Plus, I think I mentioned this before, all the data is going to be encrypted and it's going to be compressed as it moves between across the wire between the client and the server. And really, when it comes down to it, it's about achieving the best of both worlds, especially for managers that have to bring these two technologies together and try to get both development caps collaborating with each other and contributing together on every single development project. Now, as we near the end of today's presentation, what I want to do is I want to cover a promotion that LANSA is currently running called the iFusion.net Challenge. As a reward for participating in today's presentation, if you saw something today that can address some of your IBM and Microsoft integration problems, then we want you to challenge us to prove that LANSA can fuse your .NET and RPG applications together. So what is the iFusion.net Challenge? Well, it can be anything from a private demo to a free personal interoperability analysis with one of our integration experts, to a free proof of concept where we participate on-site, install all the software for you, and build a working prototype over your live data and legacy applications. So if you're interested in the iFusion.net Challenge, you can either call us at 630-874-7071, or you can send us an email at info@lansa.com and just tell us you're interested in participating in the iFusion.net Challenge. And again, I will give out these details again at the end of the presentation. So we'll end today's call on a company overview slide on LANSA. LANSA was founded in 1987, and we've since grown to be the largest independent IBM I development tool vendor in the world. You see, back in the early 1990s, this is when we started to do Windows and AS400 integration. I say AS400 because it was called AS400 back then. And honestly, we've never stopped. This is our heritage. It's in our DNA. Because of that, LANSA acts as technology insurance for over 7,000 customers worldwide, which is just a a great testimonial to our long track record of proven success. We have over 300 business partners now that use LANSA and iFusion.net to implement solutions that fuse Windows and IBM technologies together. Last but not least, LANSA has strong partnerships with both IBM and Microsoft. In fact, LANSA is the only development tool vendor appointed the premier status partnership level by IBM, the only one. And LANSA is one of the founding members of Microsoft's Mid-Range Alliance program, also called MAP. Now, what's important about this is that we use these relationships, both business and technology, to give our customers the best options for their particular environment and their particular applications. All right, so at this point in time, we will move on to the questions and answer session. If you have any questions, you can type them into the Q&A section, and I'll start answering them as soon as a few queue up. We'll try to cover as many questions as possible before we leave today's call. Now, if your question does not get answered during today's webcast, or maybe you just don't feel comfortable, asking a question in this type of forum, you can always email us any question you want. Well, not any question, but email us any question regarding iFusion.net to the email address that's on the screen, and that's info@lansa.com, or just give us a call, 630-874-7071. Also, I've put two URLs up onto the screen. The first one is www.ifusion.net, because as I mentioned before, iFusion.net's full breadth of capabilities was not covered today. This session just focused on protecting data accuracy and empowering .NET applications with full native access to IBM I features and functions. If you want to learn more about iFusion.net's other capabilities, then go out to www.ifusion.net. The second URL is lansa.com/fuse. Now, this is the same page you went to register for today's event, but I just want to point out that it has additional content on there as well, things like case studies that highlight some of our customers' accomplishments in terms of IBM and Microsoft integration. There's a recording of the System I Network webcast we did, I think it was last week or two weeks ago with Craig Pelkey on integrating Microsoft and IBM technology, and there's even more stuff out there that you can have access to. Also, if you're interested in participating in the free iFusion.net challenge, again, you can either email us at info@lansa.com or call us at 630-874-771 to sign up for that option and get more information. Okay, we got a couple questions. Now, while we wait for just a few more questions to queue up, let's just cover the last couple items here. When you leave today's meeting, what's going to happen is a survey is going to pop up that contains 8 questions. Not only do we really value your feedback, but filling out this survey is your ticket to the Freelancer t-shirt and the Mike Odie white paper on IBM and Microsoft interoperability. So again, be sure to fill that out. So if you have any pop-up blockers, you may want to turn that off before you end today's meeting. So let's start taking a look at the questions here. I got first one is, do existing RPG programs have to be modified in order for them to pass through the meta repository? That's a very good question. It's almost like asking how long is a piece of string. It really depends how your applications are formatted. If your applications, when they do the updates and the writes and deletes like that to the database, if they're not coded in a way where it says abort the program if you get an error, it will pick up those rules and then display them on the status bar of the green screen applications. You're probably going to want to, though, go through and just rip out whatever code you have for checking rules. So in that sense, you probably want to go through and modify, but you wouldn't have to because it would pick it up when it tries to do the insert, update, or delete. If you do have a code where it's going to abort on any kind of database error, then yeah, you'll have to go through and take that abort code out, option out, so it can actually display, run as normal, and then display those messages. Got a question here. What is the ballpark cost of this product? I'm just a product manager guy. They don't let me look at prices. I would say I know it's tier based. I know it's the size of your 400. So it's not, it's not how many .NET programs you write against this or how many business rules you put into the repository. I know it's strictly tiered price. I know it's very competitively priced product. It's not very expensive. It's more than a penny and less than $100,000. So let's see. It says the concept is sound, but it appears there may be long learning curve and setup prior to using the iFusion solution. Can you give me an example of the time frame involved? This is a very common question, actually. So think about what you do at your company. If you need to make a business rule change, right? So the valid values of field A can only be X or Y. Now you want to add Z. What you're going to have to do is you normally go to those programs and you make those changes. So what you do now is you put that rule in the repository, and instead of going to those programs and modifying that code, you just pull that code out. So you don't have to do it in a big bang approach where you go through and pull out every single validation rule and put every single validation rule into the repository. I would just do it in a piece mode where, as rule changes have to come up and you're saying, boy, that's buried in 25 programs, that'd be a red flag saying, hey, let's stick that one in the repository and start there. And then as if you ever have downtime, you could just start going through and doing some impact analysis, figuring out where you have the most duplicated code, work on those applications, and slowly start to pull those out into the repository. Once they're in the repository, now everything can use them. Your green screen programs, .NET applications, even Java programs, PHP programs, anything that accesses a database, DB2 on the IBM I, can now reuse those rules. So to be honest, there's more companies out there that have more than just RPG and .NET. They also have Java. They also do PHP. They have all these different technologies. And how can I have a mechanism that I can control this? Well, with the repository in iFusion.net, you finally can do that. Let's see here. This must be from an existing customer. It says, is iFusion.net a technology developed by LANSA like Integrator, or is iFusion.net part of LANSA Open for .NET? iFusion.net is it's a brand we have for all of our Microsoft and IBM I integration solutions. So it's almost like a WebSphere, if you will. There's a few, well, not like WebSphere. We don't have 700 products underneath our umbrella, but it's an umbrella brand name that covers a few products that all deal with Microsoft and IBM I integration. So today, what we were talking about mostly was covering, the data access layer, the repository rules, and accessing native IBM I features. That all has to do with a product called LANSA Open for .NET, which happens to fall under the iFusion.net umbrella. So just thought I'd answer that for that existing LANSA customer. Where are we here? We got how do you populate the metadata repository? Another good question. The way it happens is it's a graphical interface, and you do it on a field or file level basis. So when I say field level, I mean, let's say you have one field called customer ID that's used in 20 different files, and let's say you only want to use that, you always have the same rule for that customer ID. You can put it at the field level, and it's automatically going to be implemented at every file that uses that field. But sometimes there may be a situation where customer ID might be validated in a little bit different scenario for one file versus another. So in that case, you can validate at the file level for each one of those fields inside that file. So once we nominate whether we're working at the file level or the field level, it's actually quite simple. You go in and say, I want to add a rule. Maybe you want to, it could be a list of values rule. It could be check this other file to make sure this value exists in another file or table. It could be something as simple as, I think I mentioned it must exist in a static list of values, or it could be something as complex as you start writing code, or you call an API that already exists, written in RPG, or written in COBOL, written even in LANSA, that might have 3,000 lines of code to validate this field. But you can call it interactively right from the repository, so that every application can now reuse that API. So APIs can either be called at a rule level or called interactively from your .NET application. It's really your choice how you want to do that. But really, it's actually quite simple to add rules, and then once you're done, you just say, I'm done updating this rule. It takes care of recompiling the data access layer for you. You don't have to recompile any of your programs that interact with that file. You're not going to get level checks from RPG. Your RPG .NET programs don't have to be recompiled. Anytime they try to access the file, bam, there's your new rule, automatically enforced at runtime. What version of .NET are the DLLs? I'm assuming if you're asking of the .NET framework. That good question. Yeah, I want to say that's at least 3.0. It could be 3.5. If that's what you're asking, the .NET framework version. If not, please ask a follow-up question. But I'll get back with you if you want to expand on that question. But it's at least 3.0, if not 3.5 version of the .NET framework. That looks like that is the last question. So I think what we're going to do is unless something pops up here in the next 16 nanoseconds, we'll call it a day. I just want to thank everybody so much for taking time on your day today. Hopefully you found something of value. We're finding a lot of excitement around this topic of integrating Microsoft and .NET technologies together. It's quite obvious looking at some of the polls we took today. People, they have to integrate these two seemingly opposite technologies, but like I said before, if you do it right with a product like iFusion, it can really be a blessing, and you can bring the best of these both worlds together into a very, very strong offering for your end users, make your end users more productive, make your company more productive, more agile, and take advantage of the strengths of both technologies. So if you have any more questions, you can always email them at info@lansa.com or give us a call. And I just want everybody to have a great day today. Take care, everybody.
Ladies and gentlemen, that concludes our presentation for today. You may now all disconnect.